With that, I'd like to bring up Floyd Ciruli from Ciruli Associates. He needs much introduction, so I won't give him much. So go ahead, Floyd.
Thank you for that fulsome introduction, Mr. Kemper.
Data's on your website, right?
Got the slides up, very good. Well, congratulations, Doug and board and everyone. I've heard nothing but great reports. I wasn't able to catch too much of the convention, but it sounds like it was good, and it's always good to have a few limericks to start things off, and Justice Hobbs can always be very interesting. And also, this is a great day for talking politics, because as you know, we had the almost great debate last night. And on Monday, we can forget about these polls for at least a moment and actually see what voters think in the great state of Iowa. So we're finally off to it and getting it done. This has become a bit of a regular exchange we're going to have here today, and I think it's good for the both Water Congress, and I find it a lot of fun. We will actually be voting in Colorado on March 1st. We join Super Tuesday, and it could well be over on March the 1st. It could be conceivably over prior to that, and we'll talk about that, but it certainly could be over when about 13 states vote. We're one of the smaller ones. Many of them are large and in the South. This is the year of outsiders, and as you can see, there's my topic. I will have a column in the Denver Post this weekend on this. I did it a ways back, and the good news is there are still some outsiders dominating it. You know how you write one of these about 2 weeks out, and suddenly the entire environment changes. But it looks like we are definitely debating between the leading candidates who are indeed outsiders. Let's see here if I can move this along. This is my very latest data, and as you can see, Hillary Clinton is just locked into a race with Bernie Sanders. I'm not quite sure why Mr. O'Malley is in this race. I assume there's some reason. But Clinton is arguing experience, and I have the best chance of winning, and Bernie Sanders is arguing revolution, class warfare, take on the Wall Street, crush the billionaires. And it's definitely worked for him, although he seems to be largely concentrated among younger voters and college campuses in Iowa, of which there are a number, and also among liberals that originally had liked Barack Obama. And then as you can see, the ever-surprising Mr. Trump, who was absent last night, but even Fox admits he probably got a better rating than they did, with his little rally, is the front runner. And the key question, if Bernie Sanders, let me go do Bernie, if Bernie loses Iowa, it could well be over. He has to be able to prove that he is something besides just the strong candidate of New England, i.e. Vermont, which is where he's from. The last great candidate from Vermont was Howard Dean. Dr. Dean he was doing quite well until he got to Iowa back in 04 against John Kerry, and then he collapsed very quickly. And I would predict that Mr. Sanders might have the same problem there. Even if he wins Iowa, the dynamic would dramatically have to change because most of the Democratic Party does not look like Iowa and New Hampshire. It tends to look like North Carolina and Illinois and New York and California, and those are states that Hillary Clinton is ahead substantially, and at least partially it's because the minority community, which is a big part of the Democratic Party, supports her by 30 to 40%, and she's just winning nationally by about 15%. Mr. Trump, should he win Iowa, this could well be over. Even Mr. Cruz admits that, because he's definitely going to win New Hampshire. See those New Hampshire numbers there? That would take a revolution for him to change that, just as Ms. Clinton, I think, is going to have a hard time winning New Hampshire, but has a lot of good states after that for her in Nevada and South Carolina. Ms. Clinton already has about 400 delegates. Those are super delegates. In other words, most of Congress, most of the governors want Hillary Clinton. they are the establishment, and in the Democratic Party, they incorporate a lot of the establishment into the delegate selection process because they thought it was getting too wild and woolly after the George McGovern reforms a ways back, and so she already has a great start. So that's why this is such an interesting race, and what happens in Iowa, as weird as it sounds, could decide this even before they get here on March the 1st, and then as I pointed out, they most likely, that could be the day that would ultimately decide it. Otherwise, we could be in a really great race right into Cleveland and Philly in the summer, and that would be anybody have you been in Cleveland in July? Beautiful weather there. I just did as I mentioned, I wrote an article, and it was based on a panel that I hosted in San Francisco in December on this outsider, bringing together some good pollsters. And we debated, what does that mean? It's not a member of the political establishment. As a matter of fact, if you are part of the political establishment, you're in deep trouble today. Think of something else to do besides run for president. Little or no experience is appreciated, a thin electoral track record, and if you look at the top candidates, while Bernie has been a congressman and a senator, it's been from Vermont, very small turnout. He's popular. People like him personally. And then here's some of the questions, and frankly, these questions have been sort of flashing red now for a decade. That is to say, we've been, particularly today, we're looking at clients or candidates without experience. Younger voters really appreciate that. They don't think experience is important. Do you favor current policies or want major change? A substantial portion of both the Republican and the Democratic Party are advocating major change, very close to 50%. Are we on the right track or wrong track? Are you kidding me? We've been saying now for, again, most of that decade that only 30% saying the right direction and 70% the wrong track. Do you approve of Congress? Please. If Congress gets over 15 or 20%, they would be doing very good. How about trust in government? We also ask questions like, do you believe things will be better for your children than they are for you right now? And that has declined. And that is the exact opposite of where America was during the entire baby boom, that is to say, our growing up. Most of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, our parents, our grandparents always felt that as tough as it was, with sacrifice and hard work, it was going to be better for their kids and their grandkids, and that has dropped off. Our best days are in the past. We'll ask that question, and a majority of the public will say that, which is why those red hats of Mr. Trump play so well. He's promising to bring back our greatness. And so that we have had really these numbers here of the wrong track and lousy congressional performance for really since Katrina. That's when these numbers started going south, and then the war in Iraq, which we did not think was going well, and we were there way longer than we thought. And then we saw Lehman's go down and the entire economy crash in 08 and 09, which is really a crisis of capitalism, which is the lingering question we have today about equality. And then, of course, Mr. Obama came in, and he didn't come in alone because potentially he said, I'm a moderate and want to bring people together, but he brought Ms. Pelosi and Mr. Reid and Mr. Dodd and Mr. Frank, and they're not really interested in getting together with Republicans. They were interested in moving their agenda, which had been lingering in Congress for some time, and they all came in together, and we got very rapidly health care and regulation, which then produced the Tea Party, which then produced Occupy America, and we have been oscillating back and forth at the moment. While the Democrats are strong nationally, and there's at least some possibility they're going to win this presidential election. Let's assume Ms. Clinton is the nominee, and that's a hard thing to do, to have that third term after a two-term president, but it's possible if we look at all these numbers, and as I will with you in a moment. It's also possible we could go in exactly the opposite direction, because if you look at the governors and the senators and the congressmen, the Democratic Party has never been in worse shape. They're back to where they were in the 1930s in terms of their power outside of at the national level in terms of the presidential race. We periodically go for an outsider. There are some pictures of people that are outside. As you recall, Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater brought Frank Evans to power, a great congressman in southern Colorado, who was my first employer when I got out of law school back in Washington. Gene McCarthy, I knew him because I was working with Bobby Kennedy in 1968. George McGovern basically took over the party in 1972, drove out lots of the old powerful labor unions, and Boss Daly in Chicago couldn't even get a seat in Miami. Needless to say, how did he do? Not that well. As you recall, I think he won 2 states, and one of them was in his own. I think he won Massachusetts and D.C. As you recall, Barry Goldwater, that was a total disaster. On the other hand, there were a couple of outsiders. Jimmy Carter was an outsider. Ronald Reagan was labeled for a long time an outsider, including right during the race, who won. And had Carter not so successful, Reagan very successful. Gary Hart was considered an outsider, took on labor unions, Walter Mondale, bosses. Pat Buchanan looks a lot like Trump. He is a nationalist, very concerned about immigration, doesn't like free trade. So Pat Buchanan, in a way, foreshadowed what we're watching today in terms of Donald Trump. Howard Dean, the other Vermont politician who managed to lose in Iowa. Remember the great scream when it didn't work out so well. Barack Obama was an outsider. He took on Hillary Clinton. He took on the party establishment, which is today now back behind her, feeling that it's her moment. Mr. Kane and Mr. Paul last time, that was Senior Paul, they both disappeared pretty quickly, and now we're going into this particular race, and Trump and Cruz are clearly outsider frontrunners. And Cruz is by choice. He obviously has one term in Texas. He had office in Texas, Attorney General, but yet he plays himself and goes out of his way to be an outsider. Everyone says no one likes him. But that's worked out. Today, the fewer people in the establishment that like you is something you can put in an ad. Colorado likes outsiders. In point of fact, if you have a tone and an image of being a bit independent, a bit anti-establishment, we appreciate that. And here's a few of them. Pat Schroeder totally didn't get along with the Democratic Party establishment when she went to Congress. I don't know if you remember, but her first committee was the military committee, on military affairs in the House. She was not welcomed because she was a peace-loving anti-war Democrat. Dick Lamb was an outsider, took on the big establishment here, particularly related to economic development and the Olympics. Gary Hart came after that successful campaign of managing George McGovern, moved here from Kansas, and became the United States Senator against Peter Dominic, who was ill and also a terrible year of 74, the great Watergate year. Ben changed parties. You never knew what party he might be in at any moment. A very independent guy and very successful. He didn't have to quit. He just decided to quit. Back, as you know, a decade or so ago. Tom Tancredo truly is independent character. His party doesn't like him particularly, although a faction of his party loves him, and he's still a player out there. And John Hickenlooper has never been all that active in the Democratic Party, probably liberal on social issues, too moderate for them, too conservative on economic issues, but yet popular and, as you know, won re-election. So here it sort of plays reasonably well, and our system is permeable enough that people can get through it and get nominated. The Democrats in particular have been fairly pragmatic here of trying to nominate people. So let me get near the end here. Why? Bernie Sanders talks all about the economy because he's a sort of 19th century Marxist. As far as he's concerned, this is all about economics. It's all about class warfare. That's what's dividing us. We've got to focus almost all of our energy on inequality. We've got to take on the rich and redistribute that they normally focus on the middle class. As you know, everybody's going to get taxed, but in any event, that's his approach. This demographic transition is unbelievable. Millennials, and that's 75 million people. I'm teaching at DU right now, and so I'm teaching a group of 26-year-olds, 25-year-olds on a regular basis. They are now surging into this electorate and moving us to the left on lots of social issues in particular, which I will show you in a moment. We've got lots of racial, ethnic, and religious turmoil going on from Black Lives Matter, the Tea Party, refugees, Islam, immigration. I mean, name the issue, and you can see how that is all entwined in this turmoil, and we're not unique. This is a crisis throughout the developed West, in particular in Europe. You can see country after country, you will watch the very same tension, and then overlay all of this with national security, because almost every one of those issues involves us being worried about terrorism today, particularly right in our midst. And so those are the big drivers of what's going on. Let me just do demographic, the only one I would talk about, mainly because I'm one of those baby boomers, along with President Clinton and President George W. and Hillary's a little younger, Bernie's a little older, but there's the baby boomers moving along. We were just huge. Whenever I did anything in my life, everybody was doing it. Too many people were doing it. But that's because there were 75 million of us, and we have been the dominant demographic, the dominant cohort. And now suddenly, this new cohort, these millennials, are charging in to this, and this will be their first year of, this year, of fully being available to vote, born in about 1980. So they finally have arrived, and they're going to have huge influence. And as you can see on the second chart, that line of baby boomers, that's what my Colorado polls have looked like forever. That is to say that in this state, Democrats versus Republicans were about 2-to-1. Conservatives to liberals were about 2-to-1. Conservatives were simply the dominant view here, but look at that cohort of millennials that are joining us right now, and they first started voting very strongly in 12, and we got legalized marijuana, and you can just sort of go down the type of issues that they are most supportive of, and you will find that they're beginning to dominate that conversation, and my students are quite pleased by the fact that they're coming into their own. It reminds me of when we were in 1968, 1970, and those years when we were starting to surge into the electorate and suddenly saying, Lyndon Johnson, it's time to retire, or this war needs to wind down, or those issues that we were interested in. We made our parents listen to that god-awful music that we loved so much, which, by the way, now is still the dominant music. It's just on Muzak. All right, my last slide is, and you've seen this slide before, I just regularly update it, and that sort of pulls the whole picture together in terms of if you're trying to do a forecast. Because if you're trying to do a forecast, you look at the economy and you'd say, Democrats would benefit if it was really good, and the Republicans probably would benefit if it's really bad, in terms of whether or not there's going to be this, quote, third term for Democrats, or a sort of a revolution in Washington. But the economy is kind of middling. Obviously, we feel at the moment it is potentially on the cusp of a worldwide recession. We're very concerned about it. So is the Federal Reserve. They're not thinking of raising rates again. But on the other hand, there's been a lot of improvement. Unemployment's down. You can go down the list. Iowa's even better than the national averages, as is New Hampshire. Notice so that's a close one. I don't think it helps Hillary a lot, or the Democratic nominee, but it also probably may not hurt. The president is at his usual 45, 44. That's where he's been now for about 3 years since he got reelected. Not a lot of help, just also sort of middling in there. Obviously, if it was 51, that would really help Hillary, because she could point to him to some extent. But keep in mind, her husband was at about a 62 when Mr. Gore wasn't able to use that to move into the White House. Although, as you know, he did win about a 500,000 vote advantage. He just didn't win those final 360 votes in Florida. Notice Miss Pelosi, who is forever in waiting to get back into the speakership, is, in my view, unless the Republicans truly fall apart in this election, will keep waiting. Her alternative goal in life is to get Hillary Clinton into the presidency, along with almost all of the senior women in the Democratic Party who are now endorsing Hillary, most of them who are near retirement, Miss Mikulski, the two senators from California, sort of the leadership of the Democratic Party that all came in the feminist wave in the early 90s. They would like to see Hillary win. But if the Republican Party falls apart completely in the presidential race, there is a possibility that Nancy Pelosi could pick up 30 votes. I'm not betting it. I think it's a long shot, but it is possible. Could the Democrats win the Senate? Absolutely. They only need 4 seats if they win the presidency and 5 if they don't, and they could certainly do that. At the moment, we don't think Mr. Bennett is in trouble. We do believe this state is competitive. Obviously, the Republicans haven't decided who they are going to run. They have to go through their primary process. There is a huge field, and nobody identified as the candidate that you would likely give $50 million to, most of which will come from wealthy out-of-state interest groups in Washington, D.C. You don't see anybody there exactly you want to bet on. So there's where we are right now. I would predict that Colorado will once again be a battleground state. We are going to be, I think, in play. Very good news for our television stations, very bad news for you, because you will see all of those ads. As you know, during the last Senate race, for poor Mr. Udall and Cory Gardner, they spent about $5 million the last 2 weeks on television ads. You cannot buy. They run out of time on television, so they would back up 2 or 3 ads around Adele on Channel 9 or a football game or whatever would be something good to buy. And keep in mind, we're now down to the last 2 or 3% of people who are either undecided or might switch. They probably don't watch television. So this is a really lucrative business for the TV industry, but maybe not so efficient. Nonetheless, that's where we're headed. As you notice, the business that I'm in, which is doing polls and analyzing polls, has dominated this race so far. I mean, not only do we say who's on the stage, we say where you stand. Pollsters, poor Mr. Cruz, he ended up in the middle last night, and so everybody fired at him. But normally that would have been, or has been lately, Trump. And whether or not you can even get on the stage is also decided by polls. And then the other thing that's quite obvious is these debates have been the dominant medium out there. That, for me, has been good. I think I've gotten a great deal out of it, even though I don't know that I need 5 more. But they've definitely finally beginning to winnow this race, and I think you should end up with maybe 3, maybe 5 candidates coming out of New Hampshire in the Republican Party, which is where the big field is. We have some polling questions that we're going to put on our phone. Where is Mr. Kemper? He's sort of the...
I'm here, Floyd.
Excellent,
for
sir.
you as always.
All right, I'll let you take command of that. I think our first questions relate to your thoughts on the direction.
Sure. And for those of you that have forgotten, we're going to bring this up on the screen about what you need to text. We're bringing that up here. Okay, so the first thing you need to do, if you haven't already set this up, is texting CWC 2016 to 22333, unless you've already done it. If you've already done it, can you bring that up on the screen? And so our first question is coming up in just a second. There it is. Okay, so pretty kind of just an A-B question here. Do you believe Colorado is going in the right direction or is on the wrong track?
As you recall, that is a
Text
sort of a standard
A or
national
B.
question.
A or B?
And that is a pretty common answer if those numbers hold up that I see when I do it in local jurisdictions or statewide, because we are much more pleased with our environment within our own states and communities than we project onto the nation this immense polarization and gridlock that we see. and this failure. We are angry. We are alienated from much of Washington, and that's being reflected, obviously, in the year of the outsider. So that totally makes sense. I think we're going to test
if you can stop texting, and we'll close that poll, and we have another question.
We are going to run through the candidates, and of course they're going to be extremely interested in this. Exactly where is the water Congress on the presidential field?
Hopefully we'll get this one right. Do you have a favorable view or unfavorable view of Donald Trump?
All right, Mr. Trump is up.
If you're favorable, text A, and unfavorable, B. So we'll leave that up.
At least at the moment, we appear to be crowded in here with a lot of establishment. Whereas these wild and woolly revolutionists that want to shake things up, or at least like to be entertained, don't you assume this was going to be 4 very entertaining years if he became the president? Every day you would not know what might happen, I think. I teach public opinion and foreign policy at DU, and that's one area where he is probably the most unusual or unpredictable. All right, Mr. Trump is not sweeping at the moment the Colorado caucus.
84, 85% unfavorable, so
next.
Not popular. Okay, the next one is, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of Hillary Clinton?
There it is, 100%. Close it out immediately. The Democrats, no, we have some movement here. All right.
We'll leave this up for...
Ms. Clinton is the establishment candidate in the Democratic Party, and as you can see, it hasn't served her as well as she would have liked. She would have loved to. She was well ahead in Iowa, and as now you saw the numbers, it's probably dead even. I think she may still have an advantage because I think her support is spread around the state more than concentrated just in the major college campuses. But she is, and I'll tell you the truth, I don't think that's too much different than her national favorabilities or even her state favorabilities. The last poll that was done here was last fall by Quinnipiac, and people not trusting her and not having a favorable image were two things that she suffered from. And in heads-to-heads with most of the front-running candidates at that point among the Republicans, she was losing by 5 to 6, 7 points, leaving me with the prediction that this could be a very close state. Next,
okay,
sir.
We'll close that one, and we'll bring up our next. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of Ted Cruz? Text A for favorable, B for unfavorable.
Mr. Cruz is the sort of, as you know, there's 3 tracks in the Republican Party at the moment. Mr. Krautheimer and many other people have written about it. He wrote about it this morning, I saw. The establishment sort of track, which Bush and Rubio are on, the religious conservative, social conservative track, which Mr. Cruz and Mr. Carson is on, and then the Trump track. We don't know what it is exactly, but it's not happy. And Donald Trump totally dominates it, and he's and at the moment he's in a plurality race, a front runner. Well, Mr. Cruz, he would be very happy with this because most people say he really likes to be poorly thought of. It has served him well. As you know, he's not picking up a lot of support in the Senate. There's a couple senators, I think, but most of the delegation is in the McConnell camp of not caring for him. Next,
okay,
sir.
Floyd will close that. Thank you. And so the next question, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of Bernie Sanders? A for favorable, B for unfavorable.
Let's see how many billionaires there are in the room. Not that many. Yeah, Bernie's, well, he and Hillary are quite close here, it looks, at least in the early voting. And his favorabilities are higher than hers. That's at least partially because I think people don't know about him. I think that the Republican Party is salivating about getting the hammer and sickle up there in all of their advertising because they think that ultimately his nostrums and his viewpoint, even though we have many progressive aspects of our national life and our government superstructure, including Social Security and things that have a socialist base, that ultimately he will be poorly thought of in terms of his tax policy and harming the great economic engine of American capitalism. But they are, as you can see, fairly close. Is that it?
Yeah, we do. No, we have one more.
Okay.
We're not going exactly linearly. So our next one is back to our side. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of Marco Rubio?
The man kind of on the establishment track. Had a good night last night, some of the analysts say, but yet has not had the kind of traction he needs in Iowa or even in New Hampshire to be really secure. Partially it's because his track is crowded. He's got Mr. Kasich, he's got, but he's got, looks like at the moment, he's got the highest favorability of anybody that we've tested so far, unless the numbers, we have some voters in.
Pretty close.
Kasich and Christie and Bush and Rubio, maybe not Fiorina, but it's a very crowded track. He needs that to clear out.
Okay,
All right.
To pull that, we have a couple more, Floyd.
Okay.
Bring up the next one.
So add them all together, and who would be most favorable in your mind?
Exactly. So who do you have the most favorable view of? And we have Donald Trump for A, Hillary Clinton B.
A lot of variability there. Looks like the weather.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders D, Marco Rubio E. So A for Trump, B for Clinton, C for Cruz, D for Sanders, E for Rubio.
Well, I would say we're fairly reflective of what's being talked about, because I think the ticket that the Beltway crowd talks about the most is Clinton versus Rubio, and they also believe that will be a very, very close race. That she will carry the burdens of the Democratic Party and her own personality, and Mr. Rubio has some inexperience, and he is leading a party that has had lots of trouble even keeping a speaker and getting things done in Washington. So they're both, but ultimately, as you know, this is a choice. There's not going to be a perfect candidate out there, so you're going to walk into that booth in November, or more likely you're going to walk into your kitchen and vote by mail, and you're going to be making a choice, and it sort of suggests that Colorado will once again be potentially a 2-point state.
Great. Floyd, we have one more poll question. It's just
Okay.
a pretty basic one. What is your party affiliation? A for Democrat, B for Republican, and C for Independent.
I think the last time we did this in the summer, there were a few more Democrats than Republicans.
That's what I recall too.
Yeah. But this looks like the state registration right at the moment. I would say that we're more unaffiliated independent voters than we are in either party. And this surge of these new voters, my students, for example, are probably 1/2 independent, 40 or so percent, so 40 to 50% independent, 40 to or so percent Democrat, and 1 Republican. We always seem to have 1 Republican, somebody who voted for Romney or McCain or somebody. But generally speaking, which tells me that they're liberal and they might be inclined to vote for Hillary Clinton, but they don't have much passion for her. It's not clear that they're going to turn out. But what they are not is attached to the Democratic Party. They are not even remotely attached to the Democratic Party. They are simply, to the extent they have religions, for example, they're not established organized religion. They're not established a Democratic Party. I talk about I'm a big alumni activist. My law school, my undergraduate school, I even go to my high school reunions, and they don't. That they have friends and individuals and they have relationships, but they are not particularly attached to some of the traditions that we are in the baby boom and older and some of the institutions. So I wouldn't, the Democratic Party should not even remotely relax if they think that generation is theirs. I think that generation is up for grabs with the right particular candidate and message. And would it be impossible for Mr. Rubio to attract them? I don't think so. I think he could if the Republican Party gave it a try. Are we done, sir?
We're done, sir.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.